Millionaire thought he was marrying an ugly woman in arranged marriage, but he was shocked when she was beta. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The heavy oak doors of the grand wedding hall swung open. Crystal chandeliers poured light down the aisle as hundreds of eyes turned toward the bride. At the altar, a young millionaire stood tall, his expression sharp and unreadable. His name was Adrian Cole, the only heir of the Cole business empire. To the world, he was the perfect bachelor, tall, successful, and impossibly wealthy. But today, he was only a reluctant groom. Adrian had agreed to this marriage because his father demanded it. The family wanted to merge with another old-money household, and he was the price. His bride, he was told, was plain, timid, and far below the glamorous standards of his usual companions. The rumors were cruel. They painted her as unattractive and socially awkward. Adrian convinced himself this marriage was nothing more than a contract, a business exchange to protect legacy. The music swelled, and the bride appeared at the doorway, wrapped in a flowing gown of ivory silk. A delicate lace veil covered her face completely, hiding every feature. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Adrian did not bother to look twice. His lips curved into the faintest smirk, dismissive. "So, this is the woman I am supposed to spend my life with," he muttered under his breath. His gaze dropped to the marble floor, his heart heavy with disdain. From beneath the veil, the bride clutched her bouquet tightly, her knuckles pale against the stems. Her name was Elena. For years she had lived in the shadow of gossip. People only saw her as a poor orphan, raised by distant relatives. They called her unlucky, unworthy, forgettable. But she walked forward with steady steps, her spine straight, her breath calm. She had promised herself she would not break under their cruel eyes. The priest's voice carried across the hall. But the silence between Adrian and Elena spoke louder than any vow. When the time came to lift the veil, Adrian hesitated for only a moment before obeying tradition. He barely looked at her. In his mind, he already knew what he would see: an unappealing face, a dull partner, someone he could ignore once the papers were signed. But as the veil slipped away and brushed against her lips, something unexpected flickered in his chest. For a heartbeat, he caught the light in her eyes before she lowered them. There was no ugliness there, no weakness, only quiet strength. He blinked, unsettled. He told himself it meant nothing. The ceremony ended. Applause rang hollow. Soon they were husband and wife in name only. At the reception, while guests feasted and laughed, Adrian sat apart, sipping champagne with practiced boredom. Elena sat silently beside him, enduring the whispers that floated through the air like poison. "She is not beautiful enough," one woman sneered. "He must be miserable," a man scoffed. Elena lowered her eyes, her cheeks warm with humiliation, but she did not falter. She had endured worse. In her heart, she whispered a vow no one could hear. "I will not let anyone decide my worth again." And so began their marriage, one built on pride, silence, and pretense. Neither of them knew that behind the quiet stairs in the heavy distance, a storm was already rising. The mansion stood like a fortress on the edge of the city, its tall iron gates closing behind the newly married couple. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, and the halls stretched wide, decorated with priceless art. To outsiders, it was a palace. To Elena, it felt like a cage. Adrian walked ahead without looking back, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the floor. He moved as if she was invisible, as if the vows spoken hours ago carried no weight. A servant opened the door to a lavish guest room, and Adrian stopped just long enough to give a short command. "This will be your space. I expect privacy. Do not interfere with my life, and I will not interfere with yours." His tone was cold, his eyes already elsewhere. Elena looked around the room. It was larger than the entire apartment where she had grown up, filled with velvet drapes and gold-framed mirrors. Yet it was not comfort she felt, but emptiness. She simply nodded, holding her silence. Days turned into a quiet routine. They lived under the same roof but in separate worlds. At breakfast, Adrian read financial reports while Elena stirred her tea quietly, her presence barely acknowledged. At night, the sound of his car engine often announced his late returns, carrying the scent of expensive cologne that did not belong to her. The Cole family, especially Adrian's stepmother, made no attempt to hide their disdain. At a dinner one evening, she leaned across the table, her voice dripping with contempt. "A plain orphan, sitting at this table, pretending to be one of us. How fortunate you must feel." The servants exchanged nervous glances, but Adrian said nothing. He lifted his glass and drank as if he had not heard a word. Elena's cheeks burned, yet she kept her composure, pressing her lips together until the moment passed. Alone in her room later, Elena pulled out a worn sketchbook from her suitcase. Its pages were filled with pencil drawings, landscapes, portraits, fleeting moments she had captured with delicate strokes. It was the one place she allowed herself to breathe, to remember who she was beyond the cruel whispers. She sketched by the dim light of a lamp, unaware that this small act would one day reveal a side of her that Adrian could never ignore. Meanwhile, Adrian busied himself with his empire. Meetings, investments, endless social events filled his schedule. In public, he played the part of the charming millionaire, the perfect businessman. In private, he treated his wife as little more than a contractual obligation. Yet something about her silence lingered in his mind. She did not complain. She did not beg for attention. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. One rainy evening, as Adrian returned from a gala, he paused outside Elena's room. The door was slightly ajar, and a warm glow spilled into the hallway. Inside, Elena sat by the window, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, her hand moving across the pages of her sketchbook. The storm outside rattled the glass, but she was calm, her focus absolute. Adrian found himself staring longer than he intended. For the first time, he wondered if the rumors had been lies all along, but pride pulled him back. He turned away before she could notice, reminding himself of the agreement he had set. She was his wife in name only. Nothing more. Still, as the thunder rolled over the city, he could not shake the image of her serene face, lit by lamplight, as if she belonged to a world entirely her own. And so, under one roof, their silent war continued. A husband who refused to feel, and a wife who refused to break. Neither of them realized that the walls between them were already beginning to crack. The days dragged on, each one heavy with silence. Adrian buried himself in work, traveling from boardrooms to late-night gatherings, while Elena remained a shadow in his mansion. Their paths rarely crossed, yet fate had a way of forcing small encounters. One night, Adrian returned home past midnight. The storm had ended hours ago, leaving the city wrapped in a heavy stillness. As he walked upstairs, a faint light caught his eye again, Elena's room. The door stood ajar, just as before. This time, curiosity tugged stronger than his pride. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. Through the narrow gap, he saw her seated at the desk, sketchbook open. Her hand moved with elegance, each line deliberate. He leaned forward, trying to catch what she was drawing, when the floorboard beneath his foot creaked. Elena turned abruptly. Her eyes widened for a split second before she closed the sketchbook quickly, hiding it under her arm. "It is late," she said softly, her voice calm but guarded. "Should you not rest?" Adrian straightened, his face unreadable. "I was passing by. I did not expect you to still be awake." His gaze flicked toward the sketchbook. "What are you hiding?" "It is nothing," she answered, standing and moving the book out of reach. "A habit from my childhood." Adrian almost pressed further, but something in her tone stopped him. Instead, he scoffed lightly and walked away, though the image of her bent over the pages lingered in his mind. He told himself it was meaningless, yet he could not erase it. The next morning, at the breakfast table, he found himself watching her more closely. She poured tea with steady hands, her posture graceful, her face calm despite the lingering whispers from the household staff. He noticed the quiet strength in her movements, the way she did not flinch under the cold atmosphere. For reasons he could not explain, it unsettled him. That evening, a small accident shifted everything. Adrian had returned from a tense meeting, his mood dark. As he stepped into the hall, he collided with Elena, who was carrying a tray of tea. The porcelain cups rattled, one spilling hot liquid across her hand. She gasped, setting the tray down quickly. Adrian frowned. "Are you hurt?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Elena shook her head, though her skin flushed red from the scalding heat. She tried to hide her hand, but Adrian caught her wrist gently, inspecting the burn. For the first time since their marriage, his touch was not cold. His thumb brushed against her skin, his voice lower. "You should put ointment on this." She pulled back, her eyes steady. "I can take care of myself." He hesitated, surprised by the firmness in her tone. Most women he had known sought his attention, his wealth, his protection. But Elena stood before him, proud even in pain, refusing to bow. Later that night, he found himself replaying the scene. The way she met his eyes without fear, the way she endured without complaint. It was so different from the shallow beauty and easy flattery he had been surrounded by his entire life. And then came the moment that shook him further. Days later, he walked into the library to find Elena asleep in the armchair, the sketchbook fallen open beside her. He bent down to pick it up, intending only to close it. But the pages stopped him. Drawings of landscapes, portraits, and even one of his own silhouette filled the book. The detail was breathtaking. Every stroke carried emotion, depth, and truth. He stared, unable to look away. Elena stirred and woke, realizing too late what he held. She sat up quickly, reaching for it. "Give it back." Adrian looked at her, his voice quieter than he expected. "You are talented. Why do you hide this?" Her eyes hardened. "Because people see only what they want. To them, I am not worthy of admiration. My drawings are mine alone." He paused, hearing the sharp edge in her voice. For the first time, he felt something stir, something dangerously close to respect. He returned the sketchbook without another word, but as he walked out of the library, his thoughts betrayed him. Elena was not who he believed her to be. She was not weak. She was not dull. For the first time, Adrian wondered if he had been blind all along. Whispers did not stay confined to the walls of the Cole mansion. Soon they spilled into the city's high society. At charity events, at business luncheons, and at glittering galas, people spoke of Adrian's new wife with thinly veiled ridicule. "She is too plain for him," one woman muttered behind a jeweled hand. "She lacks refinement. She does not belong in our circle," another added, her voice sharp enough for Elena to hear. Adrian heard the words too, but he did not correct them. His silence cut deeper than the insults themselves. Elena carried herself with quiet grace, smiling faintly as though the comments did not reach her. But each whisper was like a blade hidden beneath silk. The pressure grew heavier when Adrian's former lover returned to the city. Her name was Cassandra, a woman of striking beauty and polished charm. She had once been by Adrian's side at every event, and now she appeared again, draped in glittering gowns and armed with confidence. At a private reception one evening, Cassandra approached Adrian with a smile that held both familiarity and challenge. "Adrian," she said smoothly, placing a hand on his arm, "I was surprised to hear you had married. I had to see for myself." Her eyes slid toward Elena, who stood quietly near the edge of the room. Cassandra's smile sharpened. "So this is the bride. I must admit I expected something more." The words were spoken sweetly, but the venom was unmistakable. Laughter trickled among the nearby guests. Adrian felt every eye in the room pressing down on him. He tightened his grip on his glass, his jaw tense, yet he did not defend Elena. Instead, he shifted the conversation back to business, leaving her to endure the humiliation alone. That night, Elena returned to her room, her hands trembling as she clutched the sketchbook to her chest. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why he had stayed silent. But when she thought of confronting him, her pride silenced her voice. She would not beg for his protection. Adrian, however, was not as unaffected as he appeared. Alone in his study, he poured himself a drink, the ice clinking against crystal. Cassandra's words echoed in his mind, but what unsettled him more was Elena's composure. She had stood in the fire of ridicule without flinching, her eyes calm even as she burned inside. Why had that image lingered with him all evening? A few days later, another moment cracked his armor. It was late, and a chill wind swept through the city. Elena stepped out of the car after a family dinner, shivering lightly in the cold. Without thinking, Adrian slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The action was so natural, so uncalculated, that both froze in silence for a heartbeat. Elena looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his own hand brushing against hers. "Do not misunderstand," he said stiffly. "It is only because appearances matter." But as she walked ahead of him, her figure wrapped in his coat, he could not shake the warmth that had risen in his chest. From then on, small cracks appeared in the wall between them. At dinners, he found himself watching her more than the food. At events, his ears pricked at every unkind word spoken about her. He still said nothing, but his silence no longer came from indifference. It came from confusion, from a heart at war with itself. And yet, the outside pressure did not ease. The gossip sharpened, the judgment grew louder, and Cassandra circled like a vulture. The world seemed determined to remind Adrian that his wife did not belong. But deep inside, Adrian began to question whether the world had ever truly seen her at all. The storm came without warning. It was not thunder or rain this time, but a scandal that threatened Adrian's empire. One morning, the headlines screamed across every business paper: Cole Enterprises under fire for fraud investigation. Stock prices plummeted, reporters crowded the mansion gates, and investors demanded answers. Adrian locked himself in his office with his advisors, his face carved with anger and exhaustion. The walls of power he had built so carefully were beginning to tremble. Elena watched from a distance. Servants whispered that the empire might collapse, that Adrian could lose everything. She could have remained silent, hidden behind the walls of her room. But something in her refused to stand aside. That night, she walked into his office. Papers were scattered across the desk, phone calls came and went, and Adrian's eyes were sharp with frustration. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "This is not your concern." Elena stepped closer, her voice steady. "You are fighting battles with anger. You are letting them control the story." "Let me help." Adrian gave a short, bitter laugh. "And what could you possibly do? You know nothing about business or strategy." She met his gaze without flinching. "I know people. I know how stories spread. Right now, you need someone who can calm the storm outside while you handle the war inside." Adrian wanted to dismiss her, to send her away as he always did. But her eyes held a quiet certainty that unsettled him. Against his own pride, he let her speak. The next day, when reporters swarmed the mansion gates, it was Elena who stepped forward. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, her expression calm. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward her. For a moment, the crowd expected her to crumble. Instead, she spoke clearly, her voice ringing over the chaos. "My husband is a man of integrity. I stand by him, and I will not allow false accusations to define him or this family. We will face this together, and the truth will prevail." The words were simple, but they struck like lightning. Headlines shifted overnight. "The silent wife speaks." Investors began to hesitate before pulling out. The tide had not fully turned, but for the first time in days, Adrian saw a glimmer of hope. That evening, when she returned inside, Adrian was waiting. His usual mask of indifference had cracked. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice low. Elena set down her coat, meeting his eyes. "Because you needed someone to stand with you, even if you did not ask." He stared at her, silent for a long moment. Finally, he said quietly, "No one has ever done that for me before." The distance between them shifted that night. For the first time, Adrian looked at Elena not as a burden, not as a rumor, but as a partner. Pride still held him back. But something deeper was beginning to take root. Later, when he passed her room, he saw the sketchbook open on her desk again. He paused at the doorway, remembering the words she had spoken to the world. Strong, unshaken, unafraid. And for the first time, Adrian wondered if he was the one unworthy of her. The scandal eventually calmed, but Adrian could not forget the sight of Elena standing firm before the cameras. It haunted him in the quiet hours, when the mansion fell silent and his thoughts grew heavy. Who was this woman who had entered his life as a rumor, yet defended him with more courage than those he had trusted for years. He began to notice things he had ignored before. The way the staff looked at her with newfound respect. The way she carried herself, unshaken by sneers. The way she disappeared into her sketchbook, pouring her soul into lines and shadows. Curiosity gnawed at him until one evening he sent his assistant to gather information. What he uncovered startled him. Elena was not just an orphan raised by relatives. Before tragedy had struck her family, she had been recognized as a gifted artist, winning competitions and scholarships. But her relatives had buried her talent, forcing her into obscurity, while gossip twisted her image into something unworthy. Adrian stared at the old newspaper clippings spread across his desk. Drawings with her signature graced the pages, praised by critics for their depth and emotion. He felt a pang of guilt. How many times had he dismissed her as insignificant, when in truth she had been extraordinary long before their paths crossed? The next morning, he confronted her gently. She was in the garden, sketchbook balanced on her knees as the autumn light filtered through the trees. He approached slowly, his voice softer than usual. "Why did you never tell me?" Elena looked up, startled. "Tell you what? That you were an artist, that your work had once been celebrated." He set the clippings on the bench beside her. "I found these. Was the world wrong about you, or have I been blind?" Her hands froze over the sketchbook. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she closed the book carefully and met his eyes. "You think truth is something I owe you. But you never asked. You never wanted to know." Adrian flinched at the sharpness in her tone. She continued, her voice steady but filled with pain. "People decided long ago who I was. They called me plain, unlucky, unworthy. Even you believed it without question. So I chose silence. I chose to keep the best parts of me for myself." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth, but no defense came. All he could say was, "You are right." Elena stood, her posture proud. "This marriage was supposed to be a transaction. You made that clear from the start. But understand this, Adrian. My dignity is not for sale." She left him there in the garden, holding the fragile papers that told the story of the woman he had underestimated. For the first time, Adrian felt the weight of shame pressing harder than pride. That night, he lay awake, remembering her eyes when she said those words. He had thought himself the powerful one in their arrangement, the one with wealth, control, and choice. But perhaps, without realizing it, she had been the stronger all along. Winter arrived with its cold winds, but the chill that gripped Elena came not from the season. It came from the storm brewing within the family itself. Adrian's father hosted a grand gala to silence lingering doubts about the company. Politicians, investors, and socialites filled the hall, their laughter echoing beneath glittering chandeliers. Elena entered on Adrian's arm, her head held high, but she could already feel the stares, the whispers crawling across the room. Cassandra appeared again, radiant in a gown of crimson silk, her smile sharp as glass. She raised her voice just enough for the crowd to hear. "Adrian, you deserve someone who matches your world. Not this." Her gaze swept over Elena with open disdain. "She is a stain on your reputation," the crowd murmured. Some laughed softly, others nodded in agreement. Elena's face remained calm, but her hands clenched tightly at her side. She braced herself for the silence she had come to expect from her husband. Adrian felt every eye waiting for his response. The old Adrian would have swallowed his pride, allowed the insult to pass for the sake of appearances. But tonight, he looked at Elena, at the strength in her eyes despite the cruelty aimed her way, and something inside him broke. He stepped forward, his voice carrying through the hall. "Enough." The room fell silent. He reached for Elena's hand, lacing his fingers firmly with hers. "This woman is my wife. She is the most dignified, courageous person I have ever known. If anyone here doubts her worth, then they doubt me as well." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cassandra's smile faltered, the color draining from her face. Adrian turned to face the guests fully, his tone sharper now. "For too long, you have whispered about her. You judged without knowing, mocked without truth. But I will no longer stand by in silence. She is not a stain on my name. She is the reason I stand here stronger than before." Elena's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time, he had chosen her in front of the world. The hall buzzed with shock, but no one dared challenge him further. Cassandra turned away, her pride shattered. Adrian squeezed Elena's hand, his voice lower now, meant only for her. "I should have done this long ago." And in that moment, under the harsh lights of judgment, Adrian Cole made his choice clear. He would not hide behind pride or silence again. The aftermath of Adrian's declaration spread quickly. By the next morning, the newspapers carried bold headlines. Millionaire defends wife in dramatic gala confrontation. The story ignited conversations across the city. For once, the whispers were not about Elena's supposed flaws, but about the courage of a man who had stood openly for his wife. Inside the mansion, however, the deeper reveal was still unfolding. Adrian sought Elena in the quiet of the library. She was standing near the tall shelves, her fingers grazing the spines of old books. When she turned to face him, there was a question in her eyes, one that words could not easily express. He took a breath, his voice low but steady. "I need to tell you the truth. All this time, I thought this marriage was nothing but an arrangement. I convinced myself you were a burden, a shadow forced into my life. But I was wrong." He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I see you now, the strength you carry, the dignity you protect, the talent you hide. You are not the woman people whispered about. You are more than I ever deserved." Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the wounds of his silence still lingered. "Why now, Adrian? Why only after they tried to humiliate me in front of the world?" His voice faltered for a moment before he continued. "Because I was blind, because pride made me a coward. But when I saw you endure their cruelty, when I saw you defend me against the storm, I realized the truth. You are the one who has carried this marriage, not me. You are the reason I have not collapsed." Her eyes softened, tears glimmering though she held them back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something she thought he had forgotten. A folded page torn from her sketchbook. The portrait she had once drawn of him. "I kept this," he admitted. "From the night I saw it, I could not let it go. Every time I looked at it, I wondered why someone you had every reason to hate would still draw me with such honesty. Now I know. Because your heart is stronger than mine has ever been." Elena's lips trembled, her walls beginning to crack. "Adrian!" He took her hands gently, his voice breaking through the silence. "I do not want this to be a contract anymore. I want it to be real. Not for appearances. Not for the family. For us." For the first time, Elena allowed herself to believe him. And in that quiet library, the truth of their hearts was finally revealed, not through wealth or status, but through the raw sincerity neither had dared to speak before. The days that followed carried a different weight inside the Cole mansion. Where silence once reigned, there was now the sound of something new, gentle conversations, shared meals, and the fragile beginnings of trust. Adrian no longer hid behind cold glances or distant words. He sought Elena's presence, whether in the sunlit garden or the quiet library where she sketched. At first, she remained cautious, her heart hesitant to surrender. But slowly, she saw that his actions matched his promises. One evening, Adrian invited her to his office. On the desk lay a single document, the original marriage contract, the one that had bound them together in name only. Without a word, he took a lighter from his drawer and set the edge of the paper aflame. The flames consumed the cold signatures, leaving nothing but ashes. He turned to her, his eyes steady. "No more transactions, no more terms. From this moment, our marriage is not about obligation. It is about choice. My choice. And if you will allow it, ours together." Elena felt her chest tighten, her throat thick with emotion. For so long, she had carried the weight of silence and judgment. Now, standing before her, Adrian was not the proud millionaire who had dismissed her, but the man who had chosen her openly, without condition. She reached into her sketchbook and tore out a fresh page. With deliberate strokes, she drew the image of the coat he had once draped over her shoulders, the small act that had planted the first seed of change. When she handed it to him, her voice trembled but held certainty. "This is not about wealth or reputation. This is about us. And if you are truly ready, so am I." Adrian took the drawing, his hands closing over hers. "Then from today, I will never let you stand alone again." The mansion no longer felt like a cage. It became a home, not because of its marble halls or glittering chandeliers, but because of the bond forged within its walls. Outside, society continued to gossip, to speculate, to judge. But Adrian and Elena no longer lived for their approval. They had found something stronger than status, something deeper than pride. And as they walked hand in hand into the uncertain future, they knew that what had begun as a contract had become something far greater. A love born not of arrangement, but of truth, dignity, and choice.